Was Joan of Arc a saint, a witch, or a warrior? For centuries, people have argued over that single question. In her lifetime, she was called holy, heretical, dangerous, and divine, all at once. But before she was any of that, she was just a girl from a small French village who believed heaven was speaking to her. She led armies, faced kings, and died at the stake before her 20th birthday. Her story has never been simple. To understand who she truly was, we have to start where her world began, among fields and prayers, in a country at war with itself. France in the early 1400s was tearing apart. The 100 Years' War had raged for generations. English kings claimed France's crown. Powerful dukes allied with enemies. Cities burned, and hunger spread across the countryside. The idea of France itself was fading. In villages like Domremy, Joan's home, war wasn't history, it was daily life. Armies passed through, burning crops and homes. People hid their faith like treasure, clinging to church bells and candles as reminders that heaven still watched. Joan was born in 1412 to Jacques d'Arc and Isabelle Romée, humble peasants who believed in hard work and God's mercy. She grew up learning to tend animals and recite her prayers. Neighbors later said she was different, serious, devout, kind, but with a fire in her eyes that made you stop and listen. Then, when she was about 13, something extraordinary began. Joan said she started hearing voices, not whispers or dreams, but clear commands that filled her with both fear and peace. She said they came from heaven, first from Saint Michael, then Saint Catherine and Saint Margaret. At first, they told her simple things, to live righteously, to pray, to protect her purity. But soon their words became urgent. They told her that God had chosen her for a mission, to drive the English from France and see the Dauphin, Charles, crowned as king. Imagine being a teenage peasant girl in a war-torn land, carrying a secret like that. For some, such visions could only mean holiness. For others, madness, or even possession. Centuries later, scholars would debate what she truly heard. Some would call it faith, others would call it illness, but Joan never doubted. To her, the voices were real. They gave her courage when no one else could. They made her believe that even the lowest-born soul could be chosen for something divine. By 16, she could no longer ignore them. The voices told her to leave Domremy and go to Charles, the rightful heir of France. She didn't know how she'd get there, only that she must. She began with the local garrison commander, Robert de Baudricourt, in the nearby town of Vaucouleurs. Picture the scene: a barefoot farm girl standing before a battle-worn captain, declaring that God had sent her to save France. At first, Baudricourt laughed, but Joan kept coming back, calm, certain, unafraid. People started whispering about her, how she seemed to know things before they happened, how her faith never cracked, even when mocked. When news arrived that a French victory had occurred just as she predicted, Baudricourt finally agreed to listen. Whether from belief or superstition, he gave her a horse, armor, and an escort to take her to Charles. Joan cut her hair short and dressed as a man for safety. Then she set off through enemy territory, crossing forests, rivers, and the front lines of a war she had no part in, except in her own mind, where God had given her one. After 11 days of travel, she reached Seine, where Charles was hiding in a half-ruined castle. His advisors were skeptical, his priests cautious. Yet, curiosity won. They agreed to test her. According to legend, Charles disguised himself among his courtiers, while another man sat on the throne. Joan walked straight past the impostor, knelt before the real Dauphin, and called him by name. Whether that story is fact or myth, its truth lies deeper. It shows the power she carried, the certainty that disarmed kings. Charles didn't dismiss her. He ordered theologians to question her. They found no fault, no heresy, no lie, and in the end he gave her what she asked for: armor, a banner, and command to march with his troops to the besieged city of Orléans. Orléans was France's last stronghold. If it fell, so would Charles's claim to the throne. The English had surrounded it for months. Food was scarce, morale broken. Defeat seemed inevitable. When Joan arrived in April 1429, she was a sight none had seen before. A young girl in white armor, carrying a banner painted with Jesus and Mary, saying God had sent her to lift the siege. Soldiers stared. Priests crossed themselves. Some mocked her outright, but others felt something stir. She demanded order from chaos. She told soldiers to confess before battle, forbade drunkenness and looting, and led them in prayer. When she spoke, even skeptics listened. The fighting was fierce. On May 7th, Joan was struck by an arrow in the shoulder. Witnesses said she pulled it out herself, climbed back onto the field, and raised her banner high until the troops followed. The next day, the siege was broken. The English retreated. For France, it wasn't just a military victory, it was a miracle. A teenage girl from a village no one knew had turned despair into triumph. Soldiers called her La Pucelle, the maid. To the people, she was proof that heaven had not forgotten them. And to Charles, she had become something no army could provide: faith itself, walking in armor. The victory at Orléans changed everything. For years, France had known only loss, humiliation, and retreat. Now, a single girl had reversed the tide. Soldiers believed again. The people whispered her name in prayers. Even Charles began to look like a king. But Joan said her mission wasn't done. Her voices told her that Charles must be crowned at Reims, the ancient city of kings, where France's monarchs received divine anointing. Reims was deep inside enemy territory, far beyond any safe road. The idea of marching there was madness, but Joan insisted, and when she spoke, her conviction was like a flame. Doubt melted in its heat. In June 1429, Charles's army began the impossible march. What happened next would feel like a story written by faith itself. As they moved through enemy lands, towns that had resisted for years suddenly opened their gates. Some surrendered. Others offered supplies. Many said they had dreamed of the Maid before she arrived. Every mile brought new followers. Soldiers fought harder. Peasants wept in the streets. Priests blessed her passage. By the time they reached Reims in July, resistance had vanished. On July 17, 1429, Charles entered Reims Cathedral. The air was thick with incense and awe. Joan stood near the altar, holding her banner as the Dauphin was crowned King Charles VII. It was the moment her voices had promised, the purpose of everything she had endured. Witnesses said she wept during the ceremony, not for glory, but gratitude. Her mission, at least as she understood it, was fulfilled. For France, it was rebirth. For Charles, legitimacy. For Joan, proof that obedience to her voices had been right all along. But triumph is rarely the end of a story. The higher Joan rose, the more dangerous she became to those who ruled beside her. Nobles whispered that she was arrogant, that she bypassed tradition, that God did not speak to peasant girls. Charles, newly crowned, began to listen. He owed her everything, but her presence reminded him of that debt. Joan wanted to keep fighting. The voices told her the English must be driven from France completely. But Charles hesitated. He wanted peace, politics, control. And Joan was not built for patience, so while the king turned inward, she returned to battle. In the spring of 1430, she rode north to defend the town of Compiègne under attack by Burgundian forces allied with the English. It was a desperate fight, uneven and chaotic. As her troops retreated toward the city, the drawbridge was raised too soon. Whether out of panic or betrayal, no one knows. Joan was left outside the walls. Surrounded, she fought until her horse was dragged down, and she was pulled into the mud. The Maid of Orléans, the woman who had crowned a king, was a prisoner. The Burgundians knew her worth. They sold her to the English for 10,000 livres, a fortune at the time. To them, she was more than a captive. She was a symbol that could be destroyed. If they could prove she was no saint but a witch, no messenger of God but a servant of darkness, then every victory she had won and the crown she had secured for Charles would crumble under suspicion. Charles did nothing to save her, no ransom, no negotiations. The king she had lifted to glory left her to face her enemies alone. They took her to Rouen, a cold gray fortress turned courtroom. There would be no fair trial, no impartial judges. The panel was filled with English-backed clergy, led by Bishop Pierre Cochon, a man more loyal to power than to truth. Joan was 19. They accused her of witchcraft, heresy, and the sin of wearing men's clothes. For months, she faced interrogation after interrogation, more than 100 sessions in total. Yet she never broke. Her words, recorded in the transcripts, still cut through time. When asked whether her voices truly came from God, she answered calmly, "How else would he speak to me, if not through his messengers?" When asked whether she was in God's grace, a question designed to condemn her either way, she replied, "If I am not, may God put me there, and if I am, may God so keep me." The judges wanted a heretic. What they found was faith that refused to yield. But the court pressed hardest on her clothing. They said it was unnatural for a woman to wear armor or men's garments. To Joan, it was protection, nothing more. She had learned what danger meant, in a camp full of soldiers and in a cell with guards who didn't fear God. Still, they used it against her. Under pressure and facing the threat of execution, Joan signed a document renouncing her voices and agreeing to wear women's dress. But within days, she was found again in men's clothing. Some said her guards forced the situation, removing her women's garments so she had no choice but to protect herself. The court didn't care. To them it was proof of relapse, of defiance, of sin. On May 29, 1431, they declared her a heretic. The next morning, they sentenced her to burn. On the morning of May 30th, 1431, Joan of Arc was led from her cell to the marketplace of Rouen. She was 19 years old. The streets were already full. Townspeople, English soldiers, priests, and officials pressed together to watch. For the English, it was more than punishment. It was theater. Burning her meant burning the story she had become. Joan asked for a cross. A soldier, moved by something he didn't understand, broke 2 sticks and tied them together. He handed it to her. Another priest held a crucifix high, so she could see it above the crowd. As they tied her to the stake, she began to pray, softly at first, then louder, until her voice carried across the square. She called on Jesus over and over again. When the flames rose, she cried out, "Hold the cross high, so I may see it above the smoke." Then the fire swallowed her words. Witnesses said even the soldiers wept. Some dropped to their knees. The English executioner later confessed that he feared for his soul, that he had burned a holy woman. When it was over, they threw her ashes into the Seine, scattering them so that no relics could remain. No shrine, no grave, no place where people could remember her. But memory doesn't burn, it only changes shape. The English had tried to erase her. Instead, they made her immortal. 25 years later, the world shifted again. In 1456, a new trial was ordered by Pope Calixtus III at the request of Joan's family. Dozens of witnesses came forward: villagers, soldiers, priests, people who had seen her fight, pray, and suffer. They spoke of her honesty, her courage, her unwavering faith. The court listened, reviewed the evidence, and declared her innocent. Her first trial, they said, had been corrupted by politics, lies, and fear. The heretic was now a martyr, wrongly condemned, divinely vindicated. But even that wasn't the end. Over the centuries, her story grew beyond the war that created it. To the French, she became a national symbol, a peasant girl who rose higher than kings and saved her country when no one else could. In times of division and loss, her image returned. During revolutions, occupations, and wars, France looked to her again. The girl in armor, the banner lifted, the faith unbroken. Writers filled pages with her words. Artists painted her visions. Soldiers carried her name into battle. She became what France needed most, proof that courage could rise from the humblest place. The church, too, reclaimed her. In 1909, she was beatified. In 1920, she was canonized as a saint. The girl once condemned as a witch now stood among the holy. But sainthood didn't settle her meaning. To some, she was God's messenger. To others, a revolutionary. To feminists, a symbol of strength. To skeptics, a reminder of how conviction terrifies power. Each generation has remade her in its own image: saint, soldier, savior, symbol. And maybe that's what keeps her alive, because the truth of Joan of Arc isn't fixed. It breathes, shifts, and shines differently depending on who looks. Picture her once more. A peasant girl from Domremy, standing before soldiers and kings, claiming to hear the voice of heaven. She crowned a king, defied her judges, and faced the fire without fear. To some, she was chosen by God. To others, a danger to order. To all, she was undeniable. Her story asks a question that still echoes across centuries. When history rewrites a person again and again, do we ever discover who they truly were, or only who we need them to be? Maybe that's the only honest answer left. Joan of Arc wasn't just saint, witch, or warrior. She was a girl who believed something so completely that the world had to listen. And belief, when it burns that bright, never truly dies.